So you want to talk a little Cincinnati, huh?
Yeah. So some of your places that or some of the people that you've ran into in Cincinnati, as far as superstars or just great people.
Yeah, there was, that being in Cincinnati, of course, that was just a whole nother doorway into another side of radio that was just far and beyond what I ever thought, radio could be. This was when, the morning show guys at this radio station were making maybe $500,000 a year. I mean, the money that was coming out of these radio stations. I mean, WLW in Cincinnati is just an icon of a station. You talk to a truck driver who drives truck overnight, and they'll tell you about WLW because we actually have a show. Well, they actually have a show that's for truckers on the overnights, and it makes a ton of money.
Wow.
And you hear truck commercials and all of that. That was, at the time when I got there, that station made $40 million a year. The iconic rock station there, which is WEBN, that thing was pulling in $19 million a year. And the amount of money that was being handed out to jocks and sales bonuses and things of that sort was just I remember getting a bonus. I hadn't even been there a whole year. I got a full year's bonus, and because they were just handing out bonuses. So my very first couple of years there was just unbelievable. They had just bought. They had 2 radio stations. They had bought 6, and they jammed all 8 radio stations into one building. So we were on top of each other. And the culture there was such that the 2 main radio stations hated the rest of us. They couldn't stand us. And our job was to protect them. So it was a little bit, it was kind of disheartening because I was like, wait a minute, I want to come down here and be, I want to be all I can be. I don't want to be 5th, but that was the gig. But then I realized, okay, that's the gig, and I'm actually better at that. I'm better at helping others and being kind of behind the scenes and all of that. So there were some radio people that came through there I've met Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, because when they're out doing their stuff and they need to do their show, they happen to be in the area, boom, they're doing it. And I've had people, like Jerry Springer was doing radio for a while. One day I'm working in my studio upstairs, and he and a producer bust in and say, we've got to have the studio right now. He's got to be on the air. And I just got up, backed away. He sat down and started doing this radio show. And then I since, met him and recorded with him and things of that sort. And Bill Cunningham, who does a national syndicated show on Sunday nights, he's an iconic guy there. Started out as just a goofy lawyer who can talk a lot, and he's still doing it. And he used to do a show at night, and basically they told him he's actually a really good debater. So if he ever got anybody on, he could tear them to shreds. It's the kind of radio that you wish you could do, but it's so uncomfortable for the listener that you can't do it on radio. Right. So they told him to dumb down his show. So he would do crazy stuff, like he would bring on like the mayor of Cincinnati to talk about something really serious. And then he would, at the same time, he would bring in the worst Elvis impersonator he could find and sit him right next to the mayor. Okay. And he told that guy to be as obnoxious as possible during the interview. And it would just completely fall apart and go off the rails, but you'd see another side of the mayor. And so that was kind of like and they were just kind of experimenting on that news talk station. And I got really excited about news talk, watching those guys work. It's one thing to talk over an intro, but it's another thing to try to, hold an audience for 3 hours. And I remember talking to one of the guys, Mike McConnell, who also worked at GN for a while and then came back. And I remember he used to be a production director. And I'm like, oh, wow, maybe I could be a news talk guy. He goes, well, here's what you need to find out if you could be. Grab a cassette player and just talk for 3 hours and just try to be interesting for the whole 3 hours. Yeah. If you can do that, do it, because the phone calls don't always come from the listeners. And I'm like, oh, okay. So that's a whole new different side of the radio business that I got a chance to see really close.
I not, of course, not a big market, but I did that at KBZ when they switched things over to news talk. I had to do for 4 hours. I had to do a talk show, but we had to do, the news breaks and stuff like that in it too.
But
that's hard.
That is
to do.
that to me has got to be. I had so much respect for those guys after I saw what they did.
Yeah.
That to me. If you did that and were able to do it, that's really amazing.
Well, I'm sure I didn't get the ratings that they got in Cincinnati, but
I tell you,
I did do it.
I don't think a lot of people do, because there's only there's a couple of people still there at the radio station that are really super good at it, and there's just no way that I could ever do that. And thank goodness I figured that out, because that was the other thing too, is I got to this large market and there were people that were so talented in one direction that there's just no way you could even compete. And so my job was to sort of just be good in a lot of different directions, and then it sort of changed over. But the people that Johnny Cochran came through after the OJ trial. I think O.J. Simpson was there just before I got there. The endless amount of bands that would just show up out of the blue, unannounced.
Yeah.
They started doing a thing here towards the end where we actually had a little performance studio in the radio station, and bands would show up when they really weren't that hot. But they would then they would perform here, and then maybe the next year they would blow up, like Hinder. I remember seeing Hinder, and it was just 4 little scrawny dudes that came in. Nobody knew it. They had one song out, and we would fill it up with a bunch of listeners, and these guys would play, and you'd be like, okay, well that's and then next year they were like just huge. So there was just a lot of people that just kind of roll through. I even had some interesting conversations with people who would come in to do radio commercials, like senators and representatives and things of that sort.
Okay.
But you would have maybe 5 or 10 minutes of their entourage would be out in the hallway trying to figure out where the script is at and all of that. And you'd get to talk to a senator, and as just like a real live person.
Yeah.
And, one of my favorite questions to ask was like, why do you do this?
Yeah.
Politics just seems like the absolute and they would always answer with, well, why do you sit in the studio? Because I love it. Believe it or not, I love politics.
Yeah.
And so that was really neat, running into that, and then also just being on the forefront in a kind of in a bad way. I always talked about, it was always like working at Clear Channel and iHeart. It was always like working at the very front of the Titanic. You were the first one to see the iceberg. You were the first one to get hit by the iceberg. And I guess I'd rather know what was coming at me than be totally blinded at the back of the ship wondering what went on. And that's what we were. We were at the forefront of everything that went on in the radio industry. I got to see it about a year before it fanned out to everybody else.
Oh, okay.
And so I was never surprised by, hey, all these little markets are being bought up by the big company, and they're starting to get rid of all these bodies, when I felt awful about it. And the other thing about it too is that there was nothing to stop this train from happening. It was going to happen regardless of who, because I used to talk with friends that would be like, if we didn't work for this company, none of this stuff would be happening. Yeah, somebody else would be doing this and watching the evolution as it goes.
The reason that you gave, though, was because of them buying up the company at the same time the housing market went down the toilet.
That's sort of,
yes. They kind of lost, what, $10 million or something?
Yeah,
like
lost like $15-16 billion in
billion, yeah.
It was billion, yeah.
That's a little bigger.
And working for a big, the big radio stations, we were lucky enough, if you were in a larger market inside the company, you were kind of protected by a bubble. If sales met their goals and you made all this money,
right,
they usually leave you alone. They would usually leave you alone. But as it went on, they would get, because the debt just never went away, and they were like, okay, we need a little bit more money from you, a little bit more money from you. Yeah. And they would squeeze that bubble down. And then they got to the point where they're like, well, now we just need to start squeezing bodies out of it. When I first got there were 300 people that worked at the radio station. When I left, there were, now this is going to sound like a high number, there were 40. But what those 40 people were doing was for the whole company.
Right.
And it was, they have, like WLW has a full-time news department, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I think there's 3 people on at the same time. But they do news for 26 different markets.
Yeah.
The traffic guy down the hallway doing traffic does traffic for 10 markets. And so it got smaller and smaller, and then the technology of what you could do with the technology. When I got there, I thought when I was going into a big market, because I was at MUS and they had the sequencers, and I thought, this is going to be, when I get to the next station, it's going to be amazing.
Yeah.
They were actually light years behind.
Really?
Yes, because when you've got a staff of 40 people that work at one radio station, you don't need to upgrade the equipment. You've got enough people to actually make it go. So everything was still on cart, and they were manually firing
Really?
everything.
Wow.
Even on the rock station. They were playing CDs. Nothing was automated. The station I was on just got an RCS automation system, and they were just testing it. And I remember at first when I got there, there was no CDs, no commercials, carts. It was all in the computer, but I still had to sit there for 6 hours and hit the button to make it go,
Really?
even though it would go all by itself, because they were just so uncomfortable with it.
Yeah.
But then they finally got comfortable with it, and I got to the point where I was doing a 4-hour shift, and I voice tracked my own shift in 20 minutes. And then go do commercial production.
Right.
And then the callers would call in to do a song request. The program director would actually answer it and then insert the song into the log, so it sounded like, and then I would actually come on the air. I could actually jump on real quick and say, hey, let's take a request from Donnie. Here's this one's for Donnie. And I wouldn't even have to name the song.
Right.
It was just a generic, got a request for this, here we go. And so you started doing all that stuff, and that was kind of, weird. So you were always on the forefront of the technology and what the stuff you could do. Like, when I got there, it was an analog 8-track, and I had 2 boards. I had the old turn pot board and a little Mackie board with the sliders, and the 8-track was actually plugged into the sliders, and then that was then plugged into this turn. And of course, when you turned it, the levels would get all out of whack because it was all. And I think that board, somebody built that by hand back in the 1950s.
Wow.
And then they got rid of that and gave me like kind of a real board. And then we started getting like the cool edits for and then I remember we built a room that was strictly for a Pro Tools machine that nobody knew how to work.
No.
You had to know how to actually work Pro Tools to get the studio to work. There was no board. And that was the first time I came across that. And that would have been in 1999.
Yeah.
And so there was all this new technology coming out that I got a chance to see. And I found that more fascinating than the rock stars, because after a while, then as we started consolidating, my workload went from, what it was normally to 4 or 5 times what it be. And I remember listening to other people in other markets talking about, I did 36 commercials today and I'd be like, that's nothing, because we were doing stuff where, like, we were the flagship station for the Cincinnati Bengals and the Reds. And the way they worked it there is that we actually ran the whole broadcast. We sold all the commercial inventory for the games, and we paid the Reds whatever we paid them, and then tried to recoup all of that. And so we had to do all the commercial production for that, and that also ran on the 125 radio stations that went in their thing, and we were kind of totally in charge of that. Same thing with the Bengals. They didn't have as many stations, but you had to run all that stuff and create all that. And the commercial production for a news talk station is entirely different than that. So we would be doing. I remember I had nightmares about it. They would hook up with with the State Farm Insurance, and the way they would sell it is they wouldn't just sell it to one agent. They would sell it to 68 agents. So that means you're doing 68 tags. Yeah. And you'd be like, call Jeff, and of course his name is always unpronounceable.
Yeah.
Whatever it is,
right.
For all your insurance needs, blah, blah, and you'd be doing 68 of those, and you had to get them done, right away. And so that was kind of what I really enjoyed about that Cincinnati is I got a taste of, the big disc jockey stuff there right at the first couple of years. Then it went into that, okay, now we're consolidating.
Yeah.
Let's start voice tracking. And that was back in the day when they actually paid you money to voice track. They would pay us anywhere between $5,000 and $10,000 per radio station to voice track.
Wow.
A year. But that went away really quick because there was a girl that worked down there that was doing 12 radio stations at $10,000 a pop, and they were like, I don't think we can pay somebody $120,000 a year to do this. So they kept
Yeah.
squeezing it down. And now I think they've got it rigged up. The stuff they're doing now, just before I left, is mind-boggling what they're doing. They'll have a jock like you just cut just a bunch of generic breaks. And then you'll also cut station-specific breaks. But then what they'll have you do is have you do this. They'll have you ID the radio station, and that's just it. And then do the break behind it. So now, when they put it all together inside the computer, it's you identifying the radio station with what you said out the back side, and it sounds like you said the whole thing in one long thing.
Right.
So now you're doing 100 radio stations. You're just doing the identifier up front, and all that stuff's running out the back end. And they've got a whole staff of people putting this in the computer system so that it actually fires, and it sounds really, really good.
Right.
The imaging side, they're doing the same thing. I image a radio station where I just voice like little snippets of this and that. You go to a website, you upload all that audio. Somebody does a little bit of mixing with your stuff, and then it comes in 3 pieces: a beginning, a middle, and an end. You can select, I want that beginning, that middle, that end, and you hit download. It mixes it and downloads it and throws it at you. And then you can make as many sweepers as you want.
I want to play in your world.
I'm not in it now, but that's the kind of stuff that they're working on. And the even scarier stuff that I saw, just the very beginnings of it, is they were actually starting to sample voices.
Okay.
And so let's say I want you on this commercial.
All right.
I type out a script and I hit the Oscar button, and Oscar's reading it.
Okay. Kind of like what they're doing.
Kind of like what they're doing
now.
Kind of like what they're doing with Siri.
Yeah.
And that is, you're not actually saying the words anymore.
Okay.
You're now just saying the little nuances inside the words. Because Siri actually she's not saying all the words. The computer's putting together all the sounds within inside the word to make the word. That's how you notice the inflections are getting better and better, because they're starting to, it is. That's the kind of stuff that I was seeing. But what that does is you can see, we're not going to need production directors anymore, for that. And hopefully they'll run into, I think there'll be a market for that, but there'll always be a market for the hands-on kind of stuff. But the stuff that the tech, that's what was really fascinating about being there. I went into the dinosaur ages when I first got there, and then came out, like light years ahead of where most radio stations are at. And, now most radio stations aren't even there anymore, because they've just now released that ruling that you now don't need your on-air studio with inside your listening area.
Right.
So that's going to change everything. And they were starting up there in Cincinnati. They were starting to build out, I wouldn't even call them studios. They were starting to build out just these rooms where this was going to be a studio that operated this group of radio stations and that one. And so there wasn't even going to be a building in the listening area.
Right. What do you need for a studio anymore these days?
You don't really need it.
Yeah.
And so that stuff.
Good mic, mixer, and computer. You're all set.
Yeah. And now with this whole COVID thing, everybody, they forced, see, at the radio station that I was at, they knocked it down from 40 people down to 18 essential people that would show up. And I think then they went down to 9. And a lot of the talk show host guys, they have a show there where the guys are actually doing the show together, but from their own houses.
Yeah.
And they can actually do it and interact with callers. And there's a little bit of a delay, but it's pretty close. And now they're talking about, not even sending these folks back. And we were all begging for that in the first place.
Right.
Because I could have done my job from home.
Yeah.
I could have done that since maybe 2010, because we went to an electronic production order where you didn't even need to, it's just a website.
Right.
There's the script, upload your audio.
Right.
The audio now auto loads. I can just put the commercial up and it auto loads into the on-air computer. You don't even need to dub it over anymore.
Yeah.
So there's...
Oh, you don't need to even dub it?
You don't have to.
Okay.
That's somebody else. Yeah. In fact, a lot of the network stuff that you hear, like from, let's say, the Geico commercials that you hear on radio, those are usually network spots being sent down from high up top. Those are being loaded automatically. And here's what's even, you want to do this again. There's a position in the log that's just left there. Doesn't have anything in it. It's a cart number with nothing in it. When it gets to that point in the log, it signals some server somewhere in the world
Yeah.
to play a commercial. Those people are responsible for whatever commercial runs. So they just fire it down the line. It runs and its place. They can do their own affidavits because now they're in control of it.
Okay.
And then when the commercial's done, it flips back to us.
Huh.
And sometimes they don't send something down. And you have no control. You got 30 seconds or 60 seconds of dead air.
Yeah.
But that's how they're doing it now. So, and they're also doing it now where
Well, it's kind of like the satellite. All the pretty much the satellite radio stations too
yes,
is kind of built the same way.
Kind of built the same
when I worked at Oldies when they switched over to satellite. That's
but
when
this
we
is
had to
all
set the
being
computer up.
but they could literally within, let's say the commercial's going to run in 5 minutes and they need to switch it out.
Yeah.
They handle that on their own end. They
Right.
just switch it if they want to, and they throw it, and we don't even know what it is,
Wow. Okay.
and we don't even need to tell you the truth.
Right,
Which is just bizarre that you're handing over your whole. Here you go.
Yeah.
There's 30 seconds.
Because back when I started too, you were filling the logs out, what was played. You had to check all that stuff.
That's all automated now.
Transmitters, you had to check those all the time.
That's all automated. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the AM stations, you had to turn them on in the morning when you got there.
Yeah.
You know. So yeah.
And the other thing too about being there is WLW was one of the I wouldn't say it was the first radio station online back. I think they came on board in 1933. They were the only radio station that went to 500,000 watts.
Oh.
And they did that for didn't last very long because the power that it required to actually broadcast was just mind-boggling. But the shell of the transmitter is still at the transmitter building, and it's 2 stories tall.
Oh.
And it's got these capacitors downstairs that are like the size of a tanker truck.
Yeah.
And I can't remember how many they actually put oil in them to keep them cool. I think it was like 5,000 gallons. And now, just this last year, FEMA showed up with one of these bomb shelter broadcasting units. And I think that station's one of, it's either 12 or 32 radio stations across the country that got this FEMA. But basically, it'll recycle your waste. You breathe filtered air. In case of a bomb, in the case of the end of the world, there's 2 big, basically shipping containers, and they've actually buried them in the ground. And that's where we would go in case and there's like 8 people who have these official looking cards that can only go there and all of that. So I got a chance to see that and there. And that actual transmitter, that big one, that was water cooled. So there's a pond out back, and it has all these pipes and tubes. But every transmitter that they've ever used is there. So you got the big 2-story one that's probably 50, it's got to be 25 yards wide, long. 2 stories high. Then the next one's about half that size. Then the next one's about half that size. And the one they're using now is like, it's like the size of a milk crate. It's just
there's
really
a
small.
Facebook thing you can join about transmitters.
Is there? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure it's in there somewhere.
Yeah.
It's pretty. So there's a lot of great history there, because I think the Crosley radios, the old time radios from way back when, Crosley was the guy who actually started that radio station. He also owned the Reds, and the reason he started the radio station because he wanted to broadcast the Reds games. So, and then of course Voice of America, way back in the day, that broadcast on shortwave, that was right next door to the transmitter site. So that's got, the antenna array and that thing is just mind-boggling. It's no longer in service, but that was right next door, and I got a chance to see that. So there was a lot of neat things they were doing there. And when I got there in '96, the way they did broadcast remotes and things of that sort, we were doing that all with microwaves from the trucks. Instead of dialing in on a phone and all of that, we were doing, and you could.
ISDN, did they use that at all or no? No.
We went right past that.
Okay.
It was all radio based, all microwave radio based for everything. We totally went past that.
I was so excited when I had ISDN.
yeah, and now that now it's the stuff they did, with setting up the new building, it's all fiber.
Yeah.
And then it's also backed up with, microwave and things of that sort. And I'm sure they got a backup on that. And then they actually had a couple of satellite dishes where we could broadcast up to the bird in case somebody big was, in there, to the Rush Limbaughs and things of that sort would show up. So that was from a geek engineering standpoint, it was really cool. And the engineering guys are there.
Yeah.
These are people that are so intelligent you can't even communicate with them.
Right.
I mean, they're just on a totally different. Saying hi to them is just, if you can get the guy to say hi back, that was like, oh my gosh, because they're just the mental power and the stuff that they were doing there was just fascinating. Guys that could build stuff. The engineering staff they had there, they was the old time engineer guys that could rip the transmitter apart and put it back together. These old craggy old guys that was really cool. And then the on-air staffs that rolled through there, the iconic people that people know in Cincinnati. But these are people that I used to listen to on that little small radio station, or that little radio that I had, and I just thought it was interesting. I always thought, how cool could it be to work at a radio station like that? And then, 30 years later, there I am.
Now 500. We say 500,000 watts. You said
500,000 watt that was the first one. They started.
How far did that reach?
That I thought they said that would go around the world.
Okay, 500,000.
And it was that was a lot. And now they're at 50,000 watts.
Yeah,
and they routinely get emails from people, those radio guys who like to listen to radio stations. We'll get tapes of us just confirming to them that they picked us up in Norway and Sweden and things of that sort. In fact, I used to get that with AM 1600.
Yeah,
I used to get this guy who would like, hey, I think I tuned you guys in. Here's a copy of the tape, and you'd be, oh yeah, that's us. I'll be dang.
We had one from Finland, from that little station next door here.
Yeah. So that was, so now it goes, and of course that's a Clear Channel station. So there's no radio station at the 700 position east of the Rockies. So that's why, so there's a couple of stations around the world that, that can kind of get away with, that's how Clear Channel got its name back when. There's several Clear Channel stations, but now it goes into Canada and Mexico, and I want to say, at least east of the Rockies, it covers all LW does. And then they also have another station there, WCKY, which is at 1530, and that's 50,000 watts, and that does kind of the same thing. Although that penetrates here better, it actually sounds louder here than the other one.
Now, see, I always thought that New York and Chicago were the big places for radio stations and stuff, so it's been Cincinnati, huh?
Cincinnati we had a couple of big ones, and it was just because the Crosley, who actually built radios, and then had the Reds, and
still makes like really cheap turntables.
Yeah, I don't even know if it's the same company, but
probably not.
There's a little bit of big time history there at that station. They also had who is her name, Cooney. So you've got the famous actor.
Oh, Clooney?
Clooney.
George Clooney.
Okay, well, his dad is George Clooney, and George Clooney's sister, is it Rosemary Clooney?
Yeah. Well, George Clooney's the actor.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
There's George.
Rosemary Clooney, yeah.
Was famous way back.
Famous,
okay.
Yeah.
She actually started it on radio there.
Okay.
Doing some sort of a variety show. They had like an indoor stage where they would bring in full bands and broadcast from this area in Cincinnati there, and that's how she kind of got her start in her business.
One of the first teams that I ever worked with another woman was Deborah Casamata, and she was from Cincinnati. And, she just always said she was going back to Cincinnati. That's where it really is. And I'm saying, go back there. Yeah. I never realized. I really didn't know that Cincinnati was such a big. And
I didn't either. It was kind of a shocker, because at first when they started telling me all this stuff, I'm like, every market has, this is everything started here. But the more I looked at it, more I was like, wow, they really did some, they did some really interesting things at first, and then they would it would start there and it would kind of fizzle, because they used to have people on staff. The amount of bodies they had there that when they were running these live shows and all of that was just mind-boggling, and it just got so you couldn't afford to do it, and all of that. But there was a little bit of history there. There's also some DJs that actually worked in really large markets like in New York and things of that sort, that actually went to New York, hated it, and came back to Cincinnati. A guy by the name of Jim Scott, he used to work in between Wolfman Jack and who's the sports guy? He's a famous sports guy now. But anyways, he DJ'd in between these two guys.
Yeah.
And you're just like, what? He goes, yeah, I knew Wolfman and I knew this other guy. And I'm like, it's just insane.
Yeah.
And I go, you didn't want to stay there? He's like, no, I didn't like it. I'd rather just come back here. So it's interesting how, you sort of run into somebody who knows somebody, and that's been even fascinating too, the amount of people that you kind of like, oh, you knew that guy? Yeah, okay, I knew him too, and all of that. So Cincinnati was, that was a big enough market for me, and it gave me a chance to see if I could make it there, and I think I did okay. I think 24-year run is not too.
Did you do like Mary Tyler Moore and throw your hat in the air?
I didn't get a chance to do that. No, I think if anything, it probably was trying not to throw up when I was standing in front of those 5,000 people at that first thing the second day I got there.
Yeah.
I was totally freaked out, being in what I considered, a huge radio market. And
now, was there any station like WKRP there? I mean, did you ever run into one of those stations?
I would say the station I was at the very beginning, those 8 stations I was at, was probably as close as you could possibly get. That was, again, another one of those groups like we had at Sunny, where it was like the right people at the right time doing all the things that they could do. The management we had there were like, do whatever you want.
Yeah.
As long as we're making money, you do whatever you want. In fact, they didn't mind. They actually would challenge the program directors to rig it up so that they would get complaint phone calls, because they figured if people weren't complaining about what they were doing, then we weren't connecting with that.
With the audience.
The most fascinating thing was that on the FM rock station EBN, it was the most sexist, just in your face, out of control. This station played all the music that you could think of without the edits. If the song came with F words and things of that sort, they wouldn't play the edited version. They would play that version, and nobody said a thing. And if anybody did anything on the air that was sexist, they would call the station manager, who was a female. And she was like, okay, I'll thank you, and then nothing would happen. Right. They even had a line set up to call in for your complaints. So, and they would record them. You'd just leave your message, and they would put them in promos. And it was they would turn everything they could into something entertaining. It was kind of like having, in your family, kind of like you had that really cool child who was just a big troublemaker, but a ton of fun, and you had to just kind of deal with them. That's what that rock station was like. That it was doing everything. Basically, they did everything you couldn't do.
Okay.
That you and I couldn't do with the radio. They did it.
Yeah.
And I just stood there, and I was right there. I just could stay there and watch. I wasn't part of it, but I could watch it. They did the craziest, ridiculous stuff on the air. Everything you wouldn't do that the program director told you not to do, these guys did.
Oh yeah.
And they did it. And then because we protected them with these other rock stations, we had like an alternative and a classic rock, and these guys were kind of like right down the middle of the road. They then got an extra boost, an extra life. They probably got an extra 10 years because they were protected. So, and the way we would do it to keep listeners to them, even if the music wasn't right, I always made a joke that on the rock station, we were classic rock, but I always thought that we were the station that played the worst classic rock. If it sucked, we played it. If it's classic rock and it sucked, we played it. And I remember if we ever got too close to them, there was 2 songs we played more of. One would be the Wreck of the Evan Fitzgerald.
Oh, jeez.
If you just add that 1 or 2 more times a day, that would pull your audience back and send them more that way. And there was some Elton John song we played that just
Rocket Man?
I don't know if it was Rocket Man or not. That actually might have been too good for us to play. Funeral for a Friend?
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
It was something like that. I just remember that those were the 2 songs we all of a sudden, why are we playing these? We got a little too close to EBN. We have to kind of back it down. But that was another thing. But the other thing I learned too at that, so one of the guys that imaged the rock station that I thought was like going to be this, oh man, this guy's great, I can't wait to learn from him, was actually kind of a disappointment, because what I found out is that he wasn't a very nice guy. And he would also take like 2 weeks to make a sweeper. Well, if you're putting 2 weeks into a sweeper, it's probably going to sound really good.
Yeah.
And he only imaged that one radio station. So it was a real eye opener to me. It was like, oh, wait a minute. This guy's he's not on the air. He's not making commercials. I thought this was, I didn't know he was just he was just an imaging guy, that was the first time I came across that, whereas you were at a radio station that just had a guy that did imaging. That station in WLW, in fact, WLW, up until I left, they still had their own imaging guy. And so all he did was just image. And that was another interesting side of it. This guy, the guy on the AMs is one of my best friends now. That guy is amazing. This what he does, the amount of stuff he writes. In fact, he writes and produces a ton of stuff and only about half of it gets on the air because most of the time it's either over the top or they just can't. Yeah. And the ideas that, that comes out of his mind are just stunning. And he's not even a very good producer, but the way he writes it and the way he gets Jim Cutler, the voice guy, who you hear on ESPN all the time. In fact, Jim Cutler wants to be part of this radio station because this guy makes him do stuff that's like so off the wall that I think he does it for free now. I don't think he even charges them anymore. Yeah. So that was one of the things I found out being in the larger market, that the people, they weren't as nice as they were in the smaller markets.
Oh, yeah.
And that was a real eye opener, and it made me appreciate, Muskegon. And even Lansing, where I was, and even Cadillac, it made me appreciate that better. There was also one other thing that I don't know if you ever ran into this before or not, but when Specs Howard was spitting out their recruits.
Yeah, I went there.
Okay,
but I didn't go there.
What I remember,
they told me not to do this.
What I remember there is so then you must have went there because they were telling people to do this.
Yeah.
Okay,
I went there and I read and they said no, probably shouldn't do it.
Okay, what was always fascinating is we would always get, maybe once or twice a year, we'd get somebody from Specs Howard that would show up, and we either hire them or they would just be kind of there to interview. But I always remembered I'd have to spend a little bit of time with them in the production studio, and it was always fascinating that the students from Specs Howard that were sent our way, because they were in a major market and they got to hang out with major market people, that when they got to our radio station, they thought that the stuff we were doing was beneath them.
Right.
And they thought that they could just be the next Howard Stern. Right out of the chute. And I was always like, what is this school doing to these kids? They, you're going to have to, Specs Howard, first of all, should be somewhere in the UP where there isn't anything fancy, because that's what I love the most about my career. Is I started at a really small radio station, then the next one was a little bit bigger, a little bit badder, a little bit better, and every one I went to, I never went to one and then kind of went backwards. And I thought that meant a lot. I thought it was like, if you start, where it's all really cool, I guess you could use that as motivation to get back to it. But a lot of these kids would come through and they'd be like, I don't think I can work here. Yeah. I got to do all this stuff. I got to do dubs at the end of the night.
And I got to empty garbage. And
yes. Yeah. And I always thought that that's like, wow, because I never went to broadcasting school.
Yeah.
I studied telecommunications at Lansing Community College, and they had a radio station there that I worked on a little now and then. But I never went to it for the broadcasting. And what I found out is when I did do some radio classes, I knew more than what was being taught. I remember I went to like an editing class, like how to edit tape and put stuff together. And I was already doing that. So my education was kind of on the job. And I always kind of felt...
And you always met people, too, that when you worked with that taught you how to do that, too.
Yeah.
Yeah, your mentors.
And I always felt bad for these students going to these broadcasting schools. So I was like, oh, man, I understand, sometimes you got to do that, but it's too bad they just couldn't have, started at a small radio station and, learned all that stuff. Because, we got to do stuff in radio that a lot of these people in the big markets would have never had, you would have never programmed.
No.
I would have never done a lot of stuff.
everything I did before I got to the big market, I did it here, and I wouldn't have had a chance to do that if I got even trying to do it in the larger markets. Even though I knew how to do it, there was, you can't do that. This is, Luckily, we weren't a union shop, because that just takes it to a whole new level. Where you can't even, they got DJs there that can't even touch the board.
Right.
But so that was. I thought that was interesting. The people. There was a lot more talent. But then there was a lot more, I guess, weird attitudes to deal with. Unless we were just getting a certain kind of person. I think you were interviewing, I think, Andy O'Reilly, who said that he had interviewed with Haas for a position.
Right.
Now, I was trying to think what position. It must have been the afternoon when Mark Frost left. And I never knew that. And that surprised me, because it seemed like when we would interview, when people would come in, we would find these people, and they were really good. And I have no idea where these people were at, but they wouldn't necessarily come from like giant markets. But our ability to find talent, or at least to interview people, really stunned me. I was like, when I heard that Andy had interviewed and didn't get the job, or I guess he didn't want it, I was like, wow.
Yeah, he took the job at Rock.
Right. I was like, wow, I had a job there, and and they couldn't find anybody to do what I did. I mean, it was, you start to wonder, what kind of, the timing on the people that we picked up and where they went was another aspect of that I thought was fascinating, where you caught people in their careers. Because I always thought we were catching people kind of at the beginning of their careers, and I think we were. But the group of people that we got and where they went, I don't know if every radio station, there again, I'm in such a bubble, I don't know, does every market that has a station like that, or, does that happen in every market? Do people go off, does that many people come together in that one short amount of time and then go off to do all these amazing, cool things? Maybe they do, but there was a group of people there that I was kind of surprised, as I went through my career. I'd be like, wow, that guy's in Baltimore. Oh, dude, that guy's in Chicago. Whoa, San Francisco, LA. You're like, it just seemed interesting to me that at that period of time that, people were coming through that building. And then it was kind of a stepping stone to something else.
Oh, Britta did, quite a stepping stone with that, of course, mixed up with iHeart after that, but anyway.
Yeah, but I just thought that was, I don't know if there was some sort of a magical funnel where these people were coming. I don't know how did people find out about, how did we hire people? There's a lot of stuff that I would love to go back. I'd love to, if it was an animal that we could dissect, I would love to just lay it out and just pull the layers back and just see.
I'm trying to remember how I got hired, to be honest with you. I mean, I might have had a resume, or I really don't know. All I know is Louie told me about the job. I went there, and I'm not sure if I had a demo tape. I don't even know.
And I don't even remember, like I don't remember there ever being like when I got to the larger market, people would be let go based on ratings.
Right.
Well, that never happened at Sunny.
Yeah.
When you had the job, you pretty much had it, unless you either did something kind of goofy or dumb. And they would usually give you,
usually just some goofy or dumb, it was usually
get it. You really had to go out of your way. You really had to.
Well, because for instance, I had a demo tape that I had to, sit in front of them, and they had to critique it. And there was a couple things I said in there. I said, "Oh God, they're going to hear this. Is this going to be okay?" They said nothing about that. They said the only thing they said is that when you mentioned this thing, you didn't mention where it was at. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I'll make sure to do that next time. That said something about I don't know. I don't even want to say what.
That was my problem with air checks, is that I never considered myself a great DJ. I was a good midday guy. Just to get you from the morning guy to the next person. My air check sessions mostly went like, yeah, that's okay, but we need it. I need you to, can you say something? Can you put more out there that you're just not interesting enough? I mean, you're giving us the the where, when, why, and how. But it needs a little, and I never could find that in my DJ work. It's always been like that. When I got to that station in Cincinnati, the guy, like I was on after Bob and Tom, and then the guy after me was like great.
Yeah.
The guy after me was like unbelievable. That guy, anytime he opened his mouth, it was like gold just flew out of it. And I could never get to that. And the guys on that rock station, WEBN, every single one of those people, they would say something, and it was just like, whoa, you can't say that. And they would come up with stuff all the time, and I never got to that as an on-air DJ. So that's why I kind of gravitated towards the production side on that. But yeah, the air checks.
Hard to follow Bob and Tom, but
yeah. In fact, I even got a little story about Bob and Tom. When I was at MUS, there was a salesperson. Is it Lucy
Malley?
Okay.
Yeah.
She told me this story. I don't know if it's true, but I hope it is. She was a station manager at some station up in Petoskey or Charlevoix.
Okay.
And she had a morning show, and it was Tom Griswold was the morning guy.
Okay. She had a morning show?
Well, she had the station she was on.
Oh,
the
okay.
station she ran had a morning show.
Okay.
And Tom was the morning guy.
Okay.
And once in a while, Tom would go out to a bar to do a remote and something, and he met a guy named Bob. And Bob was in a band. And I believe Bob was also a truck driver. So they would do these appearances, and they got to be friends.
Okay.
And Tom asked Lucy if it would be okay if Bob could come on and just hang out with them a couple of mornings every now and then. That'd be fine. That'd be great. So Bob would come in, and Bob was a musician and could play some songs and all of that, and so they had a little fun. After a while, Bob was hired on, I think, part-time. And so they started doing their show kind of all the time. And then I think he went full-time. And I want to say that he was hired in full-time making $3.25 an hour. And in fact, Lucy didn't tell me this story. Wait a minute. Bob told me this story when I met him at a remote one time.
Okay.
And so he's telling me this story about because I think I asked her I think I called her and asked her if the story was true, and she said it was. So Bob tells me, so he finally gets $3.25 an hour, and he decides to ask for a raise because the show's starting to take off a little bit. And he asks Lucy for a raise, and she says, well, I'm going to have to talk to the corporate guys about that. I don't know if we can do that. And she goes to the corporate guys, and a month later she comes back. She goes, I got you that raise. You're now making $3.50. They left from that station and went to Indianapolis, and then that's how they kind of
blew up after that. Yeah.
Marty McFly movie. So the Back to the
Back to
Future.
the Future, yeah.
It's the teenage. Is it Biff?
Biff.
Okay. I got to interview him one day in my production studio, and I don't know if I was doing something wrong, but I was interviewing him, and he had a guitar and he was playing some stuff, and it was so awkward. I don't know if I wasn't interviewing him right or what the deal was, but I was actually sort of being entertained by what he was doing, and he looked surprised that I was responding to him in that way, and I thought, well, why would you?
Yeah.
I don't know what I was doing, but it was fascinating, and I thought, I wish I was better at this, because I've always wanted, even though it's kind of psychotic, but I've always wanted to do talk radio, because I knew it was hard. I just wanted to see if I could do it, and I got a feeling I could probably do
now
it.
You could. Yeah,
probably now,
as long as it's not live, I mean, you can pre-record everything these days and edit it.
But I'm saying live.
Yeah,
the live.
That's what it was with me, and it was like, well, when I went to GVU, because I got hired as program director at GVU, and I had to fill in for the person over there if they were sick or whatever for doing interviews. And the first time I went on, because I usually had my routine, well, she called in sick, and it was like I had no routine set up. I had no backup. Or, I'd like calling all my friends that I'd called in the past, and politicians that I knew that, could talk for an hour,
right.
And that kind of thing. And so that was kind of wacky, but, that I got good compliments from it, like, that's what I should do. It's like, okay, cool. But anyway, you were talking about, meeting politicians and stuff. And one of the things we did during election time is you talk to the politicians that were
you know, campaigning for the guy that was going to run for president. And the one guy who I voted for, I think, back in the day was Blanchard. And he was pushing for, that was for Carter, or not Carter, but Clinton.
Okay.
And so I'm talking to him before, and I'm recording this whole thing, and I wish I would have kept the tape. Because he was a prick. He was just plain a prick.
Oh,
yeah.
man.
Yeah, let's get this over with, because I got so much stuff to do with that. You know, I'm thinking, oh, okay, you know. You find out the people, though, because, like, I don't know if you're familiar with, you know, George Lessons on TV13. He does a,
Oh, yeah.
he's a meteorologist.
He looks like a nice guy.
Well, yeah, he looks like a nice guy. But, I mean, I talked to, back with Craig James and the other guy, I can't remember his name, but when they were there, they would do the news or the weather for us. So I'd call them and record them and put them on the radio, you know. And, boy, every time George, don't you got it set up yet? Aren't you ready for me yet? I got other things I got to do. Every time. I mean, it was like, I could see if you had a bad day once. But this was like every time he talked to him, it's like, oh, come on, now, you should know by now to be set up for me when I call. Like, I'm running a radio station, I'm playing oldies, 2-minute songs. Come on, give me a break here. You know. But yeah, he was horrible. But
I ran into, was it John Lovett? I think he used to be on Saturday Night Live.
Yeah, John Lovett, yeah.
He was a major prick. I don't know if they caught him.
He plays a prick really well on comedy wise.
And maybe he is. He was. I remember. I just heard about it, but it sounded like that he was just the biggest. And I tell you what, to offend the guys there in that radio station, it took a lot, because usually their job was to offend the guest.
Right.
That's what they were trying to do. So I don't know what he did. And then the only other funny thing that happened was I was going to introduce, I don't know if it was ELO or the band formerly known as ELO, or it was when ELO was touring but not with the lead dude.
Jeff Lynne?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and I remember I asked somebody, and I was backstage at this thing, and of course I don't know anybody. You know, everybody looks the same. The band members look like the roadies look like the band members. I'm like, hey, I'm here. I'm supposed to be introducing ELO, and whoever it was, and I want to say it's got to be one of the guys from the band. He goes, nobody introduces ELO. Oh, all right, okay. Well, can I talk before you guys go on? Yes, but do not introduce us. Okay, all right, gotcha.
And this was without, because Jeff Lynne was ELO.
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, cause this is right when they were having that. I think there was a big fight over it, because I remember we started advertising it as like, hey, ELO's going to be here, and then somebody said, well, we can't say ELO. It's got to be this, and so there was some sort of ongoing thing with that. But I just, God, that guy was so no.
Like Creedence Clearwater Revisited.
All of that. Yeah. So that was always fun. The meeting of the celebrities really wasn't anything that I was
impressed with. Yeah.
No, not really, because most of the time I knew these guys. You could just tell they were just like normal people that just had really awesome jobs.
Right.
And so if I ever did run into anybody, I was always just trying. Is there a way I can talk to this person, but not gush all over them, and just, is there anything I can find that they can talk about, that they would want to talk about, and all of that? And I guess sometimes I did an okay job with that, but it was always interesting. A lot of times, they would.
I never did. I never knew what to say to them.
Yeah, I mean, I would just try anything, what do you think of this, and all that, or try. Sometimes they'd even come around and ask, hey, is there anything you wanted? Is there anything? And I'm not even recording. We're just trying to kill a couple of minutes here. Is there anything on your mind or? Yeah, and most everybody would just start, and it would be interesting what a lot of them were into, like what's going on in the world, or they've got, my kid's at home when he's doing this, and it's just like, no stuff. And like the going to the concerts and all of that, I really wasn't a big concert guy, but I loved being at the show, but like either on the side of the stage and just kind of watch how they sort of, or at the soundboard trying to figure how they all put it together. And I always thought that was kind of an interesting thing, watching them do that. And we did a lot of concerts there. We had 3 or 4 different venues where it just seemed like there was somebody there all the time. And some of these places were really small. Like I remember they had, gosh, what was this? It was Firehouse, Rat, and Warrant, maybe, and it was just at this. I mean, it was like they set up on that card table over there, and there must have been maybe just a couple hundred people there, and I wasn't even there for a station event. It was the other station's event, and I was just like, man, I can't believe these guys come out and play these shows, you know, and I just thought that was really weird. One of the best things that ever happened to me, and I kind of laugh about this all the time. So it was going to be Cinderella and Winger at Valdu Lakes, and we gave away backstage passes, and I think front row seats. But of course, Valdu Lakes, it's just benches. I'd never been there, so I had no idea what I was walking into. So we got backstage, which backstage is like, what a joke. I mean, it's you know, it's a slab of concrete, picnic tables, and so we're sitting there and we're eating, and I'm in my my Sunny FM silk jacket, you know,
I remember those were great.
And I got this stupid Sunny shirt on, like my basketball jersey underneath it, you know, and I got my hair going and the mullet in the back, you know, and I'm all spiky on top. I just think I'm this badass dude, and it's these two high school kids, and they're just totally enamored with everything. And Cinderella comes up, they come out of these trailers, and these girls all dressed up really weird come out with them, and they kind of just walk to the fence and whatever. So these guys come up, and this is so goofy. So when the Cinderella comes up, the whole band comes up. So the drummer and one of the guitar players, who's got these big bulging eyes, I can't think of his name, they're about this tall. I mean, they're just small. The bass player has the best big hair I've ever seen. It's blonde, and it's just perfect. And then the lead singer, which everybody knows, he's there, and he comes up, and they just start signing autographs. But the kids aren't saying anything. You can just tell they're just like, so I decide, let's have a conversation. So I start talking to Tom, the lead singer, and the guitar player about, you know, like, the only thing I think of is like, hey, that video you guys are at, where was that with those interesting rocks by the water edge kind of thing? And he's like, oh yeah, that was, you know, whatever he said. And then I talked to the guy with the hair, and he care less. But these two little guys, I walk up to them and I ask them some kind of a question, and one of the guys looks at me and goes like, you have no idea who we are, do you? You have no concept of what we are. I go like, well, you're Cinderella. He goes, no, you're not a rock and roll guy. You're like some sort of top 40 DJ. Yeah, that plays Cinderella. And you just give away. And I just started laughing. I just thought it was the funniest thing. I'm like, you're two midgets. I mean, how do you even reach the drums? You know, and so I got into a back and forth with them, and they had to separate us and all of that. And I just thought it was so funny. And then I remember we went out, and we had seats. I think I had seats in the second row, but there were so many people there that I kept getting pushed off this. Believe it or not, I got pushed off the side, and they wouldn't let you stand in the aisle. But this is my seat, and they're yelling, and Cinderella's up there in their stretch pants and Winger and all that, going crazy. It was the funnest time and the worst time I've had all in the same night. But that was, that
Valdu was a great place to do that, though.
It was. I mean, it was the perfect venue. Once I got there and I saw what was going on, I'm like, wow, this is, you know, and that was a perfect concert for it too. And
the acoustics weren't that great, but
no. And then we ended up running into this again. It was at Sunny. I think my wife. I had tickets to go backstage to sing Winger at some place in there, but she went with the other radio station people, and I remember she got a photograph with Kip Winger. And my wife is 4'11", so she's not very tall. So she goes, look at this photo, and I go like, the first thing I do is like, are you sitting down or standing up? We're standing. And Kip has got to be maybe 5 foot, 5'1". I'm like, is he that? She goes, oh, dude, he's really, really teeny. I'm like, I didn't even know that. Holy crap! So that was always what I was most interested in. It was like, you know, seeing these people and like, oh my gosh, they're tall, they're small, usually they were way smaller than I thought they would be. But I remember John Mellencamp's band came in, and that's when they had, they must have had maybe 8 or 10 musicians. That was a cool concert to watch from the side, because there was a lot going on. You know, stuff isn't working right and all that. But that was I was always fascinated, you know, by that.
what's going.